Welcome to Democracy in Action, insights and discussion about some of the most talked about topics of the previous month with the Fulcrum's collaborators. Consistent with the Fulcrum's mission, the program strives to share many perspectives to widen our readers' viewpoints. I'm Hugo Balta, Executive Editor of the Fulcrum and your host. Today, we are joined by Michele Weldon, an award-winning author, journalist, emerita faculty at Northwestern University, and senior leader with the OpEd Project. Steve Corbin, a professor emeritus of marketing at the University of Northern Iowa, and Dr. Anthony Hernandez, a member of the teaching faculty in the Education Policy Studies Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you all for joining us. Let's start the conversation with Michele. As you mentioned in your column, did we learn or not why there can be no going back on COVID lessons? 5 years ago in March, COVID-19 changed the world. The first pandemic in a century altered how Americans saw themselves. You wrote it prompted a parallel pandemic of disinformation that has only deepened in the years since it crescented in the last few months. Tell us more about that and the article that you wrote, Michele.
Thanks so much, Hugo, and thanks for having me here. And nice to be with you, gentlemen. You're so right. We have learned that disinformation is not only inconvenient, it can be deadly. And the problem is, I didn't know till just a few years ago the difference between misinformation and disinformation. As a journalist for many decades, I have committed misinformation, a wrong error, a name spelled wrong, a wrong fact, a date misrepresented, or something. But disinformation is intentional deceit to mislead people and to knowingly provide information that is false. And that is not just because of that pandemic, though it started there, uh, to be really a terrible problem. It is now, as you said, crescendoed, and there seems to be no end in sight. The disinformation was COVID is a hoax. Vaccines are not real, but it has gone on to Ukraine invaded Russia and tariffs are good for the world, all these things. There is aggressive action to silence people who want to call attention to the disinformation. And it isn't just about, knowing what is true and it's all hazy and ideological. This disinformation can lead to death and fatality, as it did in some of the COVID cases. And now we're seeing with a vaccination denier at the head of in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying vaccines don't count, and this, explosion of measles cases. There are kids hospitalized for taking, vitamin A that he says do that instead of vaccines. So this is a real problem. And it also goes along with the silencing of media that is trying to purport the facts and say what is true. Voice of America was shut down, and that had an audience of 360 million people each week. And there are lawsuits against networks to cause intimidation. And fact-checking groups are bracing for attacks and shutdowns. But there are those groups like usafacts.org and Snopes.com and PolitiFact.com and NewsGuard, which I just looked into, and they rate news outlets on a scale of 1 to 100 for factual information and then correction of errors. 100 being the best. Newsmax gets a 20, and Washington Post gets 100. And also, what they found is that fake news sites outnumber local news sites in this country. There are over 1,200 fake news sites and fewer than 1,200 local community newspapers in this country. So it's a real problem, and this disinformation touches health and the economy and, our prosperity, all kinds of things, our day-to-day life. If we don't know what's true, what can we rely on?
It's something that really concerns me. You mentioned Voice of America and you mentioned other news outlets not having access to the Trump administration and other government agencies. And look, journalism is a bedrock of our democracy. So I am very concerned at this very deliberate silencing of voices. I want to continue the conversation with Stephen. Steve, you wrote a column that truly frightened me, speaking about journalism and free speech. In Free Speech and Freedom of the Press Under Assault, you wrote a partial list of words that Mr. Trump has eliminated from America's lexicon includes advocacy, biologically female, black, clean energy, climate science, cultural heritage, disability, discrimination, diversity, equal opportunity, equity, females, feminism, gender, hate speech, Hispanic minority inclusion, Latinx, LGBTQ. The list continues, and you finish by writing, notice what words are not on Trump's banned list: male, men, and white. Tell us about your column.
Well, thank you, Hugo. And Michelle and Anthony, I'm honored to be here with you on this broadcast. Very simply, there were three events, Hugo, that came to my attention. First was when the New York Times journalists were able to find hundreds of words that our 47th president eliminated from documents, and I believe there are over 5,000 pages that they combed through to get rid of a whole bunch of words. The second event was on the sixth day of Donald Trump being president. He ordered Hegseth to tell the United States Air Force that they were no longer to teach the airmen about the Tuskegee Airmen, the 15,000 blacks who were pilots, first pilots in the Army, cooks, workers who fought in the war. And so I'm seeing a little bit of distortion there in my mind, like what is going on here? And then finally, when I saw that a whole bunch of news agencies were kicked out of the Pentagon, having space to work in the Pentagon, as well as could no longer attend any White House briefings. And those people that were in the media were the CNN, the Washington Post, The Hill, War Zone, NBC News, NPR, New York Times, Politico. They were kicked out of the Pentagon. There was a news agency from Germany, along with Associated Press, Reuters, and HuffPost, who could not attend Trump cabinet meetings. And then this just dawned on me that this is very reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984, when there was Newspeak that was introduced, trying to get rid of words so that, if you will, the Big Brother could control what the citizens were thinking about. And then the Ministry of Truth was also used in George Orwell's 1984, where information was combed from citizens to read because they wanted to control their mind, and they distorted all sorts of information, such as our United States Air Force people are never going to learn about Tuskegee Airmen unless they learn it on their own, but it's purposely not going to be taught. And so putting those factors together is how I composed the essay, and I thank you for publishing it. And it's received a lot of comments, both from the left wing and the right wing. But I think it's very, very scary that we're in a situation right now where a lot of this came from Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. And when I see that diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action are being sent to the side, along with a list of words that are no longer used in documents, especially those words that I just mentioned, but other words like female, females, feminism, gender, and then all the minority groups that you identified, women, that word cannot be used anymore, but the words that were left on the list were male, men, man, and white. And so those were the three incidents that caused me to compose the op-ed for you.
And you mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen and just the eradication of history and really education that you mentioned and the erasing of education. Anthony, we published a few contributions from you in March, including The Power of Classrooms, Why Diversity in Higher Education Matters. You write, a university education is more than lectures and exams. It's a gateway to opportunity, transformation, and belonging. Diversity in the classroom isn't just important, it's essential. The lack of diversity at the top institutions impact not just who enters our classroom, but how students experience their education. Representation matters, and universities must reflect the diverse realities of the students they serve. Now, tell us about, of course, your column, but I'd love to also for you to weave in the conversation we've been having with Michele and with Steve, in that deliberate, methodical strategy to erase history.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation to be here and to be with my colleagues, Steve and Michele, to discuss about these critical matters at this particular intersection in our nation's history. I think that as an instructor, a college instructor, I could look around at a top university that I teach at, and I could see in a class of 100 that I had two African American students and two Latinx students. And when I think about the alumni that come back who I get to meet with at this university, I recognize this fact. They are leaders in all the respective fields they've gone into. And so they've done really well from this university. They've gone to medical school, they've gone to law school, they've become captains of industry. But in the classrooms here, it seems very disproportionate and not representative of greater population. So, for instance, in greater population now, we have 1 in 5 people in the United States is Latino. But in that classroom, for instance, there were only 2 Latinos in a classroom of 100 students. And so I have to wonder about not only where are the students, why aren't they here? We do know that there are capable, well-trained students who can make it at an elite university, but also what is the education that we're imparting to the other dominant culture students who are in that room, who are basically not having the opportunity to engage with people who have different positionality and different perspectives. And so I'm concerned about diversity in the classroom, not only in terms of race, but thinking also about class, thinking about other parts of intersectionality and identity. In the story at the very beginning, I recount an actual event that happened in one of my classes. There was a first day of class in the fall semester where a young man waited patiently after class while the other students asked me questions about the syllabus and the requirements of the course. He finally came up and extended his hand to me, and he told me that he was the first person in his family to go to college. His parents had just dropped him off a couple of days. He came from a rural part of our state. And for me in that moment, it was really significant. It kind of humbled me actually and reminded me of how we're rooted in a very serious societal mission at the university to impart him with an excellent education, but also to have him in kinship with the other people who are in that classroom, because these are our future leaders. He's going to be one of those students who goes off to medical school or to law school and leads in society. So what is it that we're doing here that is more than just the curriculum? We are building community. We are socializing people around political and social, even economic interactions. The conversation that we're having in the room is a critical conversation, but how can you talk about somebody in the abstract? If you don't have people represented, how can we speak about them or engage with them and miss all of that which enriches our conversation? And in my piece, I was thinking as an instructor who's thinking about the educational benefits of my classroom and the important societal mission of the university, but also thinking about social justice and equity. And I would include, when we talk about underrepresented people, women in that conversation also. We do talk about underrepresented minorities, but also women at this particular university have not always been present. There's been one particular group that's always been present, and that's dominant culture males. But then also thinking about what are the commitments of the institution. If we really say that we're about excellence, then we have to provide that exposure, that interaction. High quality, high performing students can be in this place, but we want them represented from all of these different experiences. And then thinking also, if we're sending all of these students from this top institution into society, what are the economic considerations? Are we preparing them for the global marketplace? If you become a leader in society and most of your workers don't look like you or haven't had the same positionality, how is that relatable? How do you interrogate narratives and stereotypes that are hurtful when you work with those folks? And then thinking about the history of this timeline, what we call the transversal, what's happening now has historical roots. What about our democratic and civil commitments that we've said from the beginning are important to us, and how are we performing them? And if I could just say for a second about Steve and Michelle's comments, I'm concerned also about this larger narrative. And so I think about the tremendous work of Antonio Gramsci, who is a critical scholar who interrogated authoritarian and fascist regimes. In fact, he was put into jail because he was a critic. But he interrogated this idea that these larger narratives, and narratives loom large in our lives, can shape the way that people think about things. There's a very active political project that's happening now that we're trying to interrogate here. But remember, the way that the public thinks is going to shape the way that policy actually manifests. So if people support ideas and they're not critical about them, and those policies come to be, those policies can shape the lives of people. And we have to think of policy as a tremendous opportunity to lift people, or it can be a tremendous opportunity to be a barrier and to erase them. As Steve said, this project of erasure. And when we think about narratives and policies and what we call white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, we have to think about what are the intentions, who is allowed to be seen, who is allowed to be heard, and who is rendered invisible.
Excellent notes, Anthony. Thank you very much for sharing that. One of the things that you've mentioned and really has been part of the focus of this conversation has been diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think, to be constructively critical, was ripe for the attack that has occurred, right? The weaponization of DEI. When I speak to someone about diversity, and just the word diversity, there isn't anything negative about diversity or equity or inclusion. It's when these three words are put together that conservatives and the Trump administration has done very well in weaponizing it and turning it around and using it in their favor. What DEI really is an opportunity. It's a positive. It's something to be realized. And I think when it's placed in that position, we organically as human beings take a step back, and we organically are inclusive of others in helping us realize this opportunity. One question that I have for all of you as final thoughts, and it's something that I've asked of you and I ask of all of our collaborators at the Fulcrum, is we do a very good job of being constructively critical of an issue that we see, a wrong, if I to oversimplify it. And I always ask you, what is the path forward, right? So if this is wrong or it could be better, then what's the path to making it better? In the conversations that we've had around the topics that you've written, and perhaps others, because we're now circling 100 days with the Trump administration. From your perspectives and in the areas where you lean in on, beginning with you, Michele, what do you see as a path forward?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Hugo. I feel such a kinship with Anthony and Stephen. I am emerita faculty at Northwestern, where I taught for 18 years in the journalism school. And this moment in our culture is annihilation of ideas, whether they are the narrative about education, about health, about the economy, about anything. It's just a narrow, myopic view of the world is all that's allowed. And I think path forward is not being silenced. When the effort is so aggressive to erase stories and erase reality and erase challenges to falsehoods and lies, then we just can't be silent. We have to keep writing, we have to keep speaking out. And I'm very curious to see what happens tomorrow with protests called for around the country. So yeah, I'm eager to see what you both think.
Steve?
Michelle, you're absolutely on target. Hugo, I don't know if you've looked at the last couple op-ed submissions I've given you, but I'm now putting at the end of everyone a call to action and noting that this is the time that all citizens, all registered voters need to be contacting their two senators and their representative, not once a month, but possibly once a week, letting them know about aspects of what's going on in the country, letting them know their feelings and demanding that action be taken. So that's one thing that I'm doing, and hopefully news agencies that pick up my piece will let that one paragraph hang in there. But Michelle is right. Now is the time that we need to be going to protests, actively going to protests, seeking them out. There's going to be one here in where I'm living right now this coming Sunday, 10 o'clock to noon, and plan on being there. I've just got to get involved. And I think it's time that we just start reaching out to our friends, our neighbors, our peers, just like many of us do when it's election time, encouraging them to get registered to vote. But we talk about candidates. Now is the time that we need to be talking about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and throughout the world.
Absolutely. Participation is key, right? If we don't use it, we will lose it. And it is, again, our constitutional right to protest. And I think it needs to be much more methodical, meaning like it's great to protest, but then turn that energy into action. And as both of you have said, how do you do that? I really think the first step is be very active in local politics. Anthony, you have the last word.
So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think that for me, education is the great opportunity. Now, I happen to be a university professor who teaches at one of the elite schools, and I have students that I work with. I don't have them reach my conclusion. I have them visit the materials, primary source documents, secondary documents, and determine for themselves through critical thinking how they feel about these issues. But I think that our mission in terms of education is also about educating the public, interrogating these narratives. So thinking about concepts that I teach, for instance, like anti-Blackness or gender bias, how do you take sophisticated projects of hate and make them understandable to everybody so that they can act upon them? So that's what we call translation in my work. So trying to translate, and one of the reasons that I've come into this forum, to this way of writing, which is not how we normally do writing at the Academy, is so that I could engage with the public and try to explain the value proposition of particular arguments. I think that education continues to be one of our big opportunities in all the places. The other thing is one of my professors, one of my great teachers, Michael Apple, used to say, do not miss the opportunity to tell about your victories and your success stories. In really tough battles, it's going to be hard to have a lot of those, but they are uplifting and they really enrich your morale for an extended or protracted conflict. I want to think about extending ourselves, as my other colleagues have suggested here, more than Facebook. I want you to think about contacting your representatives once, twice a week, getting out there on the picket line, showing people what you stand for. We really have to move beyond our comfort zone. This project is coming aggressively at us. It is coming quickly. But there are numerous examples that I mentioned in one of my op-eds that even in darker times, in different places where people have really suffered, education has been the light that has helped them be liberated. So thinking about together, we are strong, and despite what's coming our way, we can lift ourselves and we can resist. We do have success stories of where we've done that before. So thinking about the freedom schools during slavery times, thinking about what a beacon of light and hope that was for enslaved people, and thinking about all the things that we've overcome to arrive at this moment. One of the things I want to continue to challenge people to do is to remember, when we think about things like DEI, we very much take a contemporary focus, and we don't think in a critical way about where we've been in terms of access and opportunity and privilege. When the narrative now is such that people are taking advantage, that they didn't earn their way, but what has been rendered invisible in that conversation is that at institutions like the one where I teach at, for hundreds of years, there was only one type of student that was accepted here, and that did not include even white women. So we have not talked about that advantage. That advantage has conveniently been swept to the side, and there are great universities throughout this country where that same story is a through line. And so we have to think about also shining a light on that. It's not just in this contemporary moment that some people think that they're having an advantage. There have been hundreds of years where some groups, particularly white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy project people, have been involved in this. And lastly, I would say that don't give up hope. That is really important. We have to have conversations and think about caringness and belongingness to our community. All the gestures that we make in our community, we're in this together. It's not me, but it's we. And hope floats. And it was one of our great teachers and the essayist Maya Angelou who said, love liberates. And so even Nelson Mandela said that love was one of the most powerful weapons in the world. If we activate that, there's not a weakness in that, in caring for other people. There is a collective and we can thrive together.
That's why I feel like saying amen. Amen to all of that. I think so much to draw from you, Anthony, and Michelle, and Steve. This was time well spent. I am truly appreciative of all of your contributions at the Fulcrum and really elevating the conversation, because that in a way is binding us together, right? We have a platform in the Fulcrum to have these conversations and debates. And the last thing that I would add to what you said, Anthony, is absolutely celebrate and elevate the wins. But I would also say when we fell short, because there's a lot to learn from falling short that then you build on for the next time. So the next time it's a success. Steve, Michelle, Anthony, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Hugo.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Visit us at thefulcrum.us and check out their great work. This is Democracy in Action, insights and discussion about some of the most talked about topics of the previous month with the Fulcrum's collaborators. Amugo Balta. Hasta la próxima.